Hello and welcome to another UK Column Live. I'll be your host today. It's Tuesday the 29th of January and I'm here today in the office with Brian. How are you doing today?
Extremely well.
Extremely well. Faring better than the weather, I see. How is the weather?
Well, the weather's not too good today. We've had some really heavy rain earlier on. It's cleared up a little bit, but it's grey, overcast, southwesterly wind, about 10 degrees. Pretty gloomy, pretty Plymouth, pretty England, really.
Pretty England.
But the government will be happy because, of course, the worse the weather, the fewer immigrants they think will come from Bulgaria and Romania. And if you don't believe me on that, check out the news yourself.
Indeed.
So are we talking about your fresh face this morning?
I don't think we are. No, I think I'm actually pretty unshaven, so thanks for dropping me in that, Brian. Brilliant.
Well, we just mentioned briefly, because a little bit of humour does help, but we know that Malcolm has some fans, and a lady contacted us from Cornwall to say that she would welcome the fresh face of Malcolm Massey back on screen. And unfortunately, that has put Mike Robinson and myself firmly in our place.
Okay, moving to the slides.
Well, of course, as always, we have to talk about Chairman Cameron, and the Mirror here picking up, I think, on a particularly important subject, which the headline, a little bit small, it says, "The last hurrah for Cam. Every passing week, David Cameron looks more like a one-term Prime Minister." And in this particular article, they go on and give dear old David quite a hammering. They're basically saying that he's unsuccessful, that he's got rid of 50 democratically elected politicians. He's been stuffing the House of Lords with 50 or so extra cronies. A Buller Boys feudal reign, they're calling it. And he's losing his way as a Democrat. Well, I don't think he was that anyway, but we'll say that. He's playing the European joker. The big issue in the election, however, will be the economy, not a referendum. I think there's some truth in that. They're pointing out that his sidekick is George Osborne, who is basically failing. Debt is going to be is rising, not falling. Our AAA credit rating is overpriced but getting shaky. Conservative blades are being sharpened. They go on and on and on. So it's interesting that perhaps a few of the mainstream journalists are really beginning to pick up on the fact that David Cameron is, of course, a complete con. Mike?
What's that little caption on Cameron's head there? It seems to say, "More Heath than Thatcher."
Indeed, it says it's more Heath, that he is more Heath than Thatcher. Now, we don't know what they're referring to there. Are they saying that, of course, Edward Heath fiddled the joining of the EC? He had the European movement using public money in order to run a propaganda campaign. Is the suggestion that, or are they delving a little bit deeper into some of the rather dirtier secrets of Ted Heath? We don't know. But at least we have one mainstream journalist who's beginning to point a finger at Cameron and say, what is this man?
Yeah, but they're preparing for the gentleman we discussed yesterday, whose name escapes me at the moment, who's going to replace him, right?
Possibly, or else it's simply lining up the Marxist Miliband brothers so that we go straight into the dictatorship. Independent here, of course, now talking about David Cameron and Nick Clegg being at loggerheads over redrawing of the parliamentary boundaries. But if we look a little bit deeper into this article, of course, if you've got trouble getting re-elected, then one of the things that you can do is play around with the parliamentary boundaries to give yourself an advantage. We're led to believe that there's a big falling out between Cameron and Clegg here. But I would suspect the reality is that the pair of them are simply putting this propaganda play into being to try and confuse people and muddy the waters before the election. But have a read of the story and see what you make of it. One thing is for certain, that society in Britain is changing. We're heading into big society. And Malcolm, you've picked up on a young lady being fined a huge amount of money for dropping a very small sachet of salt.
Yeah, absolutely. As you rightly point out, this could well be the beginning of a complete totalitarian state. I think actually it's a really interesting article. Of course, the title is Office Worker fined £400 for dropping small sachet of salt. it's a really interesting article. Okay, so basically she drops the sachet assault. A council officer or a litter enforcement officer, as he's described, jumps out. Although this is actually a bit far from the truth because he's a private person from a private firm called X4, who basically issues £75 on the spot fines for dropping litter. I think the whole on the spot fine is really interesting because this is complete private police working for the council.
Well, it's unlawful at common law because
well,
she can only be fined in front of a jury of her peers.
It is, and it is also actually, if I just skip to, basically it actually contravenes the Bill of Rights under the grants and forfeitures section, because the grants and forfeitures is pretty straightforward, saying that all grants and promises of fines and forfeitures of particular persons before conviction are illegal and void. Unfortunately, she probably didn't know that, and so when she did go to a magistrate court because she didn't pay the fine, she did accept the £400. Incidentally, the actual fine itself was £75. The other £125 has gone on court costs and the £15 victim surcharge. I always find the victim surcharge so ironic, since we are the victims because we're being defrauded. I just find it's completely ironic. But basically, X4, which is the company that's working for the council, is basically run by former soldiers. It issues fines and issued approximately 40,000 fines last year. They make about £1.6 million a year. And as I said before, they're issuing on-the-spot fines, which I'm pretty sure that that doesn't feel right to me in a supposed democracy. But the trouble is, a lot of councils are starting to lose money because the money that they're issuing, the X4 are getting £45 per ticket they issue, regardless of whether the people who are supposed to pay the fines pay them. Which is meaning that a lot of councils are losing their money. But because it's commission-based, we're seeing a sharp rise in fines being administered to people, because of dropping litter. Not that I condone dropping litter, I don't, but I certainly don't condone on-the-spot fines either. So between 2010 and 2011, Blanw Gwent Council issued 7 fines. After they employed X4 in October of 2011, within 6 months that shot up to 1,147 fines. Right. And we're told that this isn't about revenue, this is about dropping litter.
Well, I think there's some other things going on behind the scenes as well, because what this is state power coming down to the lowest level. So we're making people literally little Hitlers, and a wonderful elderly German lady who contacted us several years ago, and one of the comments that I've never forgotten is she said to us, Brian, why is it that people in Britain can't see what's happening to society? She said that when she lived in Germany before the war, that the whole introduction of the Nazi regime happened drip by drip, and she said it was just like an anaesthetic. And of course, one of the things this lady picked up on was that local public employees were given more and more draconian powers. So I think this is David Cameron and Big Mr. Pickles is big society coming in here. But also the other thing that's happening is, of course, Cameron is making servicemen redundant. There aren't a lot of jobs around, so ex-service people are going to go for jobs like this. They need a job, it's something they think they can cope with. So you make the armed forces redundant, and then what you're doing is sucking people into this this very dangerous area where it's not police, it's not authority, it's somewhere in the middle.
And of course, the employees that are working for X4, I have to ask, do they take any oath? And if they don't take an oath, then what are they? What is their actual powers?
We'll see.
We can certainly turn around to a police officer and ask him if he's being detained, and we can move on. So surely the same thing applies with private police.
People need to ask questions, and you've got another one here to do with democracy with the council. Yeah,
this is Mr. Pickles back in the limelight, and is accusing local councils of dodging democracy, which I find is absolutely laughable. I think what he's talking about is the rise in council tax, and that the government decided that if local councils rose their council tax by 2%, they'd have to have a referendum.
And this is the government that doesn't really want us to have a referendum on Europe.
Referendum being a dirty word in Westminster, but actually being perfectly okay in local councils. And what he's highlighting is that basically councils have risen their council tax by 1.99%, which is actually keeping them out of the referendum.
Yeah. So this is the dictatorship, big society coming in under the radar, as it were. And Mike, you've got some more here on HS2.
This is a rant by Quentin Letts, basically alleging that putting a railway line through some countryside is going to make the countryside look like it's been hit by asteroids. He put some particularly emotive images in the article, and then captions them with comments like, the one thing that went barely discussed throughout the hour so of Mr. McLaughlin's statement on the project, which may not be completed for 20 years, was the cost of the blasted thing. Right, and another comment or another caption on this was on an image of a crater in the ground, and it said, looking like a bomb has hit it. Is this crater caused by a meteor strike what the residents of Buckinghamshire and other parts of rural England can expect? So clearly Quentin Letts would prepare to be getting from A to B in a horse and cart than a train, and I'm just finding the whole sort of furore over HS2 to be getting quite amusing now.
And is that what it's designed to be, which is to distract people from other major events?
Well, I think it's part of the sort of anti-development agenda that we're, the austerity anti-development agenda that we're facing at the moment, and really the whole infrastructure plans of this government are they're presenting these plans on one hand, and then they're pushing this agenda that's anti-infrastructure in the other. They're attempting to. They're really not wanting to do these infrastructure projects, I believe,
yeah.
and that's what's behind it. So.
Okay.
Yep. Youth unemployment in Britain is rising at the fastest rate of any G8 country since the start of the recession. Now only Spain and Greece are ahead of us for youth unemployment, and this is according to the OECD. Cameron, Clegg, Osborne, they are doing nothing to sort out. They are destroying this generation of youth and the future prospects of this generation of youth. They're destroying the country as a result. So they're traitors, and they should be dealt with accordingly, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's becoming very easy to see, isn't it?
Yeah.
And of course, behind the scenes, we have the bankers.
Right. Well, this is quite interesting. And in 2004, the Financial Times, a couple of other newspapers ran this as well, but the Financial Times in particular, it was a front-page article saying, and the article was entitled "Rothschilds Getting Out of Gold." And when you read the headline and the first couple of paragraphs, it very much implied that the Rothschilds were getting out of, divesting themselves of their interest in gold. But once you read further down the article, this was in 2004, it was pretty clear that what was actually happening was that they were leaving the Gold Bullion Metal Association. That was for sure, but they were also stopping they had a practice at that time of lending gold to gold producers as a hedge against future production. They stopped doing that. In other words, once you finished the article, you discovered that in fact the Rothschilds, far from getting out of gold, were keeping the gold in their own coffers and not handing it out to anybody else, because obviously physical ownership of the metal is what's needed. You don't want it like Germany has their gold in the Fed, and then Bank of France, they're trying to get it back at the moment, and the Rothschilds were quite keen that others didn't hold their gold on a physical basis. So this is another article from ETF Daily, and of course these guys are pro metals, precious metals, so they have an agenda here. But nonetheless, it's interesting that they're saying that a recent appointment of Rothschild as financial advisor by the board of directors of gold exploration company Spanish Mountain Gold is yet another unmistakable indication that the ancient family is moving the world's gold supply to both emerging markets and central banks worldwide. So really they're highlighting the fact that Rothschild's more interested in gold than ever, and they're asking the question, is this because they foresee the continuing collapse economically and globally? So
well, presumably they can see it because they're helping to create it. So
indeed.
What can we do about it?
Well, some good news. iSieve, I'll just put that on there. iSave, now a bit of background for people that don't remember, as well, we all know that the Icelandic banks collapsed quite spectacularly in 2007. But iSave was the online portion of Landesbank, and 300,000 British and Dutch people had money deposited with iSave, and when iSave went under, for whatever reason, the UK and Netherlands government stepped in and bailed out those depositors, so people's savings were protected, and it cost about 3.1 billion pounds to do that. Time went on, and there were a bunch of legal challenges to the fact that Iceland was basically refusing to pay back this money. But Iceland's attitude was that, well, actually they didn't, the government chose to bail out the savers, and really it wasn't, it wasn't between Iceland as a nation and Britain as a nation as to whether this money should be paid back. It was between the private bank, iSave, and the people that were investing in that bank. So that went eventually to the European Free Trade Association. This is the EFTA court is responsible for adjudicating disputes between EU countries and the 3 members of the European Economic Area, Iceland. So the European Economic Area is Iceland, Norway, and Liechtenstein. So they go to, if there's a dispute between the EU and those countries, they go to the EFTA court. So Iceland actually won their case yesterday, and the EFTA court decided that there was no obligation on Iceland to pay back Britain or the Netherlands. So I think that's a success as far as Iceland's concerned, and a failure for Britain's policies with regard to the bailout of the banks.
Well, and we can also see that a small, determined country with honest, upstanding members of Parliament can actually take on corrupt banks in the banking system and win. So the nonsense that we in Britain can't do anything to sort the banks out is, of course, a complete lie.
Well, it's quite interesting because in the media coverage of this, in the not so much the FT, but some of the other newspapers, they start their coverage by basically saying it's, talking about Iceland, its government remains largely shut out of international capital markets, and its citizens labour under onerous foreign exchange controls that make it difficult to get dollars or euros for a vacation abroad. Yeah. Well, so what? Well,
but, that's also not what we're hearing.
In the meantime, Iceland is using its own national credit to rebuild its own economy, and get its own peace. So Iceland isn't suffering under the weight of austerity. Iceland's health service isn't deliberately killing people because it doesn't have the money to heal them. So Iceland has taken the right approach to this problem, and that's what the financial media is having trouble with.
We should be learning from them. You got some points.
Well, no, I just thought it's interesting that those articles that you just highlighted, Mike, is really good because I think that people often say, they think we're being cynical, they think we're being a little bit kind of far-fetched when we say that this is deliberate, but we know it's deliberate simply because the solution is really simple, and the solution is basically, as you just pointed out, is to have our own national currency. Is to administer the currency ourselves, have it completely debt-free, just like the Bradbury, just like the Greenback. And that's why it's so obviously deliberate, is because youth unemployment could easily be solved with a national currency. Infrastructure could be easily solved with a national currency. The banks could be dealt with and moved on with a national currency, and so it goes on. It's a really simple solution, and the fact that politicians are not picking up on this is not because they're incompetent, it's not because they're stupid. Let's remember they've paid their parents have paid tens and sometimes hundreds of thousands of pounds for their education. They're not stupid, they know exactly what they're doing, and they're deliberately ignoring it. Yeah. So
we should be issuing our own currency debt-free. It's a simple solution. But of course, if we jump subjects at the moment, Senator Sevray from Jersey pointed out that basically governments loved paedophilia because paedophilia was the mechanism by which people could be utterly controlled to do the bidding of whoever. And we're jumping back to the 26th of January here, where the Mirror ran quite a comprehensive story about what it called the pedo brothel. And this is the story around the guest house, Elm Guest House, that back in the 80s was being used for homosexual prostitution, but also paedophilia. And what the Mirror article is pointing out is that essentially there was a conservative group for homosexual equality that were actually using this, certainly House of Ill Repute, and strongly recommending it. And the article included quite some detail, so they put in a section out of one of the newsletters, newsletter 12 from the Conservative Group for Homosexual Equality. Here's some information that was also in the article itself, that CGHE held fringe meetings at the annual Conservative Party conference in the 1980s. According to the minutes of the Executive Committee, there were 62 members in the early 1981, but this had increased to 171 by late 83. They also campaigned for the age of consent for sex between homosexual men to be decreased from 21 to 16. And the president from 1980 until his death in 87 was Ian Harvey, a former junior foreign minister. Mr. Harvey was forced to quit as a minister after being caught with a Coldstream Guardsman in London St James Park in 1958 when homosexual acts were illegal. So we're pointing out here that at the moment it's gone deathly quiet on connections between paedophile rings and Westminster and the higher levels of government, and many people are saying that they expect a complete police cover-up. So we've seen the attack on people in the media, but at the moment we're simply not seeing the connections through to the political circles and higher fully coming into the public domain. Against the background of Elm Guest House, we're going to remind people again about the activities of such people as Harriet Harman. Here she is. We've shown this before, Telegraph article, but there's a lot on the internet where she was brought into the limelight by her efforts to water down child pornography laws. This is what she was up to. She called on ministers to make sexually explicit photographs or films of children legal unless there was evidence that the subject had been harmed. At the time she made the official submission, she was a senior figure in a civil liberties organisation, that is Liberty, now known as Liberty, and that wanted the age of consent to be lowered to 14 and incest decriminalised. So a very nice organisation, and of course Shami Chakrabarti is the chief executive of that organisation today. So the key point was that at the time this lady was involved with Liberty, together with Patricia Hewitt, another Labour or former Labour MP, Liberty was linked to both the Paedophile Information Exchange and PAL, the Paedophile Action for Liberty. But remember, what we're discussing here is ministers from Westminster who are actually tied up in some of this highly deviant behaviour, or certainly condoning it. And the web spreads, of course. This has been taken off Pink News. Peter Tatchell here also saying that the UK should look at lowering the age of consent to 14. And he actually highlights here that it was the number 10 policy unit that recently put out a release in the mainstream press suggesting that the age of consent should be dropped to 14. Now the press reported that David Cameron was against this. But what UK Column Live thinks is going on here is that essentially this is softening up of the public to get them used to the idea that the age of consent could be dropped to 14. And then, of course, under Mr. Tatchell's rules, if the age of consent is 14, but you have children as young as 12 engaging in sex, then we ought to turn a blind eye to that, presumably. So this is the libertarian policy, which is slowly but surely to be lowering the age of consent. We believe that the British government's ultimate objective is to make paedophilia lawful. An article here which Mike picked up on about a police officer. Right. It's quite an extraordinary story.
Sorry about that. Right, yes, a police officer, this is in a couple of different places. I've highlighted Politics UK here. A police officer who downloaded child porn while working for the Met Diplomatic Squad, which protects MPs, was spared jail. So this is Judge Anthony Leonard QC, who's a picture of him on the right there.
Handsome-looking man.
Yes. Well, he said to Christopher Exley, who kept a stash of 53 indecent images on 2 laptops and a memory stick, apparently. He said that you get no... Well, he gave him an 18-month supervision order and was given a month-long curfew with an electronic tag. I think he was also given a 3-year community service order. The judge said, you get no special treatment. You should have known better. And he went on to say, but on the other hand, you have lost a lot because you've been dismissed for that and not even allowed to resign. And that will have a substantial effect on the rest of your life. So the poor man was not even allowed to resign.
Well, of course, that's what normally happens with the police if you get caught in some form of crime. And what happens? They retire. They don't actually come in front of the law. They get quietly retired. But it's quite extraordinary. Is the judge here condoning what this man did? That's the inference I pick up, really.
Well, yeah, it seems that he is almost, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
I think as well also we're seeing this relationship between the the CPS and not the CPS are in this story, but I mean this relationship between the CPS, the police, and the judiciary. There seems quite a close relationship.
A little club.
I think a little club, especially when you start getting into the higher levels, when you're becoming like sergeants and chief officers, and then obviously senior members of the judiciary. It does seem, as you're saying, that there's a preference to protect each other.
The relationship is too close, and of course, should the paedophile rings actually exist inside that close relationship, we would be in a very nasty place.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, so Twitter's come into the limelight about its new video sharing app, which is called Vine. And basically, the problem is that it's filled with porn. I'm not going to get too much into the article because I think the actual what it's really about is more important in the sense of, sex is becoming very prevalent in our society. I know we're all aware of the adage that sex sells, and and that businesses use sex a lot. But this kind of explicit and graphic sex is happening a lot. Obviously, we spend a lot of the time on the internet, like researching stories and so forth. And I'm always astounded at how you can be searching something, completely innocent, and all of a sudden this pop-up of this half-naked Russian lady or whatever, someone trying to sell somebody something. And I just think to myself, but what if I was a 12-year-old child, or what if I was an 8-year-old child, and that had happened, and it really concerns me simply because the type of sex we're seeing now that is is proliferated through porn, and is also proliferated through the movies and through like your EastEnders and so forth, is very violent sex.
Yes.
And it concerns me because we're talking about the degradation of families, aren't we? That's really what the aim of the game
is.
An
attack on children's minds as well.
Absolutely, and as you've already highlighted, the sort of sexualization of the youth. I think that.
So what about this lady's book here? Well, this story.
Okay, so there's actually 2 stories. They're both featured in the Mail, which I caught online last night just before I went to bed, and it's basically they're both bringing up this book 50 Shades of Grey. Now, I haven't actually read the book myself, but as I understand that it's basically a kind of erotic story that does feature, again, quite a bit of violent sex, or sort of sadomasochistic sex. I think it's interesting because this title is Swedish Man to Stand Trial for 50 Shades of Grey Sadomasochist Sex Game Death of His Girlfriend. Although actually in that article 50 Shades of Grey was never mentioned in the whole article. So obviously the article's got nothing to do with 50 Shades of Grey, it just happens to be in the title. And then if we could skip to the next slide, please. I'd have to say yes, sir. Yes, master, or face lashing. Mother beaten into 50 Shades sex game, suffered excruciating pain. Again, this article's got nothing to do with 50 Shades of Grey. It's just a throwaway comment that you get halfway through the article, which is basically that they both read the book. I mean, the article's got nothing.
It's
promoting the book, and again, I want to get into this a little bit later with something else. But I know we want to do more stuff about the sort of tactics and the methodologies of newspapers and media. But it's interesting that this is part way down the page on the Mail sort of web, and then as I get further down, I've got another story. It's almost like my brain is primed for 50 Shades of Grey, and then when I get to 6, 7 articles later, my brain is hit again to be reminded of 50 Shades of Grey. For me personally, I just think this is an advertising exercise.
An attack on our minds, and certainly an attack on the minds of young children. While all this is going on at home, what is our government up to? Well, we must come back here to what's been happening in Africa and Mali. And the Mirror here picking up that the UK is now to send 200 troops to Africa, and it's pointing out that this is just days after 5,300 troops have been axed. But of course this is after Mr Cameron a few weeks ago was assuring us that we weren't going to get involved in a military sense. But that's what Mr Cameron tells the nation behind the scenes. He's talking to his cronies, and this is a bit of text talking about his discussion with Francois Hollande, where Mr Cameron says that he is keen to do more to help French forces routing the rebels in Mali. And he's used his national security advisor, who we're going to come on to in a minute, Kim Darroch. He's been in Paris today to talk about what more the British Armed Forces can provide. I don't seem to remember the French visiting London to offer their support in Afghanistan, but I'm sure that it's a dual relationship. The RAF is putting in C-17 transport planes. We've got 40 soldiers already on the way, more to follow. And with great glee, we're now starting to talk about the United Nations getting involved. And of course, this is to raise an army to fight the Islamists, or is it Al-Qaeda? We're not too sure, because of course the government hasn't actually told us what's happening. Now this goes on a bit here, and what we picked out is a very interesting statement. So we have 200 troops which are going to assist France. This particular article now mentions Al-Qaeda, and it says that all the troops will perform non-combat roles, and it's understood that an EU training mission is likely to see tens of troops sent in a support role. Now, what I think is going on here is that this conflict is deliberately being stoked up in order that Cameron can call in British and French forces in order to train together in order to further cement the idea of a European army. And my opinion is, it's a little bit cynical, is that both our own government and the French government are very happy to help foment yet another war in Africa, because they can use it as a training ground for British and French forces. So this is producing the European army, which of course Cameron wants. If we look at Sir Kim Darroch, this is just a statement from Wikipedia, but you can check it in other places. What we see is this man has absolutely no security or military experience whatsoever. In fact, his whole role has been in the diplomatic service, and he is absolutely 100% a man tied into European policy. So my prediction is that the escalating conflict is nothing to do with fighting so-called terrorists. What we've actually got is getting in British and French forces as part of an emerging Euro army, and it's brilliant to use a few Africans in the live training ground. If we look in a bit more detail at this man, it's a very interesting, the British Brussels network, a lovely satanic star there to help emphasise what's going on. And here we see one of the few pictures of Sir Kim Darroch, and he's with Baroness Ashton, of course another person who knows absolutely nothing at all about defence or security, but she's now been put in positions of power in Europe. So here he is in a meeting, and what he had to say was that he believed that the EU project was an idea whose time had come. Well, we'll leave you to think about that, but you might like to check and see who Mr Cameron is really relying on as he stokes up war in Africa. But of course, more people are coming out of the woodwork. Retired General Sir Mike Jackson. A lot of people respect this man, but it's very interesting to see what he has to say here. He's not really surprised that the British government feels it needs to be seen to be helping. BBC's picking that up, of course. We cannot let states fail, because we know from recent history that failed states just lead to really difficult circumstances, instability. What a shame that General Sir Mike Jackson can't apply his brain to the problems happening in UK, because clearly we've got a country at the moment which is deliberately failing into a position of instability. And if I just add one more comment, sorry, there, we added that on the bottom. He's pointing out, of course, the risk of the action in Africa at the moment is that there's protracted guerrilla warfare taking place away from the conurbations, which is exactly the situation we've ended up in Afghanistan. And if we want more evidence that the government is on a scam here, of course, William Hague has popped up. And he's boasting and says that the Western intervention in Mali should follow the model of the recent successful action in Somalia. Well, a very wise British politician. Let's see what else he says. Think of the progress we've made in Somalia in the last year, not by deploying Western armies, but by ensuring there's legitimate government, by funding and winning UN approval for African forces to do military work on the ground. So William is very confident that we've done a good job in Somalia. So if we have a look and see how well we've done. Here's the Telegraph reporting, I think this is today, certainly in the last couple of days, 6 dead in a massive suicide attack outside the Prime Minister's office in Somalia. And there has been continuing violence there the whole time that William Hague's been involved with it. And we can emphasise this again because it's not only involving ordinary citizens, we've also got children being killed in shootings. So well done William Hague and the Conservative government, because clearly if you can do as well in Mali as you have in Somalia, we should see escalating bloodshed. And the Americans have been up to something, Mike, as well, you've picked up.
Well, so there's clearly an intention to have a permanent presence in North Africa, and so we've got the New York Times here pointing out that the US is hoping to set up a base for spy drones in North Africa, planning to establish a drone base in Northwest Africa so that it can increase surveillance missions on the local affiliate of Al-Qaeda and other Islamist extremist groups. So they're thinking that's probably going to be in Niger, actually. But actually, not too long ago, Zero Hedge suggested another explanation for why there might be a need to have a spy base somewhere in Africa. And the black dots there are all showing places where Chinese interests are. Well, I would imagine that the Rothschild banking system might consider this, that the Chinese are coming in and stealing their raw materials. So that this map that was originally on Zero Hedge is showing the spread of Chinese interest in Africa, and perhaps that's one reason why there's so much interest in establishing a permanent base in Africa at the moment.
Hoovering up minerals and resources,
exactly,
basically, for the Chinese economy.
Yeah.
And other things happening behind the scenes.
Well, we've had a lot of emails in about this. We heard about this late last week, and we're still investigating what's actually going on here. But basically, Britam Defence, headed up by General Sir Michael Wilkes, KCB CBE, defence company, private defence company. Cyberwar News were highlighting late last week that one of their servers was hacked. An email was stolen, if we want to say that, and the email was quite interesting because it was apparently from Dave Golding to his fellow co-founder Phil Doherty about an offer made by Washington via a group of Qataris. So the email apparently says, we've got a new offer, it's about Syria again. Qataris propose an attractive deal and swear the idea is approved by Washington. We'll have to deliver a chemical weapon to Homs, a Soviet origin G shell from Libya, similar to those that Assad should have. They want us to deploy our Ukrainian personnel that should speak Russian and make a video record. Frankly, I don't think it's a good idea, but the sums proposed are enormous. Your opinion? Now, of course, this event never actually happened. but nonetheless, the email, if it's genuine, seems pretty damning that evidence that British private security companies are getting involved in trying to set, or at least discussing the possibility and potentially willingly getting involved in setting up Assad to be something that he is not. So we'll keep an eye on that, and we're continuing our investigations. I have to say that the email looked genuine to me. Looking at the message headers, it looked genuine, but we're
still researching on that.
Yeah.
But the implications are very serious, because basically behind the scenes, the British government and, as Mike said, military companies have, it would appear, been working to undermine Assad.
Yeah.
There was a follow-up on that, I think, wasn't there?
Yes. Well, I mean, it's. I'm just showing one of the other websites that's covering this. So plenty of coverage on the internet already, but still no firm evidence that this is genuine, although it looks like it is.
Okay.
So.
Well, we'll report more on that in due course. And Malcolm, you've been looking effectively at, we've gone from drones to Robocop.
This is the transhuman agenda that's been covered by the Mail. I wouldn't actually say the Mail is uncovering it. I'd say more in the sense the Mail is promoting it. For anyone who doesn't really know, I mean, transhuman agenda is basically the sort of movement to sort of put mechanical devices and other various things of such like microchips and so forth inside human beings
to enhance them.
To enhance them, yeah, quote. So what I wanted to show really was, of course, if you don't know what transhuman is, I really, really strongly suggest you go and research it because it is a very fascinating topic. But I just wanted to quickly show that what the Mail has been up to recently. So we've got this article today, which is the real bionic man. Scientists create body using artificial limbs. Sure. And this is more of a close-up of all the various different body parts and so forth, which can then be used. Inside the article, one person comments, "It's exciting and a bit scary. We might be at the point in science and technology where we see first glimpses of the possibilities to go beyond the limits of evolution." And this is certainly a dream of certain megalomaniacs. If we could go to the next slide. Further, this all came from the newspaper originally. Further along on page 44. We got the bionic ear that means Evie can hear Mummy say "I love you." Now, first of all, I'd like to say that must be fantastic for the parents, because the child was born deaf, and what they did was they went and had some pretty pioneering operation where she can hear, and basically the way they did that was they operated on her brain, and they fitted a device with 12 electrodes, which basically was fitted to the part of the brain which is responsible for hearing, and then a microphone was fitted just behind her ear with a magnet. Now that's great, and I'm not trying to say that we shouldn't be helping people who lose their limbs and so forth. That's not what I'm saying. But it's where this will go, and this could go to a point where we actually start creating or engineering human beings that far outstrip normal human beings. And you have to ask, would that technology be available to the rich, or would that technology be available to the poor? Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got to keep in mind that technology is a tool, just like the knife.
Yep.
Right? The knife can kill people, or it can cut things usefully. So it's how we employ it. Now, the picture that the Mail was showing of the transhuman bionic man, I would say that this technology will not be available to the very rich. This technology will be available in the sense that they won't change their own bodies that way. I would say that the way that looks to me is that they're presenting how the farmed animals, us, the unwashed, the drones will look. So they will enhance us to the point where we can be more effective workers. They will not be wanting to enhance themselves, I think.
You wouldn't think that they would be able to create a piece of technology that would ensure that their heartbeat would beat for a lot longer, that they would then in some way be able to extend their lifespan.
I still am of the view that we are being farmed. We're considered,
sure,
cattle, and we're here to produce for the elite and to keep them in the lifestyle that they like. So a more efficient farm animal is better for them. I think that's the agenda they're pushing this transhumanism for.
I think what would be a really good point to add to what you've just said is that, for example, if Brian loses his arm and I create an arm and I give that to Brian, well, I kind of own Brian's arm, don't I? And so then
we should lease them.
Well, exactly. I mean, you'll be paying rent to me, or if you break down, you've got to come to me. Either way, the more I put into you, then the more of you I own. So very quickly, if we just move to the next slide. This is an article which was produced by the Mail on the 23rd of January, which is basically about a bionic man who basically had his limbs replaced after a jet ski accident. If we go to the next slide. This is on the 20th of November 2011. We've got more about more Britons than ever are using astonishing new prosthetics. And then if we go further back, we've got on the 7th of November 2012, which is Robo-Colleague, drugs and bionic limbs could widen wage gap between the rich and the poor. I could have gone further. There are actually so many articles that the Mail has produced over the last 12 months about transhuman.
There's got to be a reason that this is being thrown at us. It's being pushed really hard, isn't it? So perhaps we should do a set programme on this subject. We'll see. Okay, well, we did have some good news in the programme around the Icelandic bank. It is possible to stop the nonsense that's going on at the moment, and that's for the nation to take back control of its own currency. Iceland can do it, therefore we can do it. It's only Mr Cameron and George Osborne that are lying to the country that it can't be done. But to end on a note, on some more good news, the Mirror has got a very interesting story which I encourage people to go and have a read of. A whole series of doctors. This is one gentleman, Guy Meadows, I think his name is, and the headline says, "Take statin sleeping pills or be resuscitated, what doctors themselves won't do." It's a bit of a negative title, but if you go and actually read the article, a number of doctors are actually speaking out on subjects which the free press and media have been covering for some years, but the dangers of sleeping pills, the dangers of statins, the dangers of doing all sorts of things under the guise of big pharma and what people are being prescribed by the drug industry. So could it be that finally we've got some, well, I'm sure we have, we've got doctors and senior medical people who are starting to actually wake up and question the guidance that the government's giving us. And that's what we need, of course, is for people to wake up, speak out, tell the truth, and shake your friends and relations awake. That's the best route to stopping what's happening. So on that note, we'll end. Thank you for joining us today. If you appreciate what we're doing and you'd like to help, and you'd like to help us expand, we'd certainly like to get groups giving us regional reports. Please do subscribe. And also we'd like to thank all of you who've sent in information and research work, because it does show us that what we're actually broadcasting at the moment is making a difference. Can we stop the criminals in power? Yes, we can. They simply need to be exposed. And we'll end by apologising to the world for the behaviour of the British government at the moment. But I'm sure we can sort it out. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.